This is what the Bible says. Then the glory of the Lord appeared at the tabernacle, and God condemned the whole generation to wander in the desert until death.
What happens when a revered spiritual leader's private life shatters the carefully crafted image millions admired? Imagine decades of silence breaking at once, revealing painful truths that no one saw coming. At 75, Bishop Paul Morton faced revelations that rocked not just his family, but an entire community. This story isn't just about one marriage unraveling behind closed doors. It exposes what happens when faith, power, and personal pain collide. What do we do when the pillars of strength show cracks? The answers are far more complicated and revealing than anyone expected. The perfect image's hidden cracks. For decades, Bishop Paul Morton was seen as a pillar of strength, a man whose faith and leadership inspired thousands. To the outside world, he and his wife, Dr. Deborah Morton, presented a picture of unity and grace. They stood together at the pulpit, sharing messages about love, marriage, and family that resonated deeply. Many admired their relationship, believing it to be unshakable, a beacon of hope in challenging times. But beneath that polished image, there were faint whispers, subtle signs that something was amiss. Rumors circulated quietly, suggesting tension and distance between the couple. These murmurs were barely acknowledged, often dismissed or ignored because the Mortons were held in such high regard. People assumed that any struggles would be minor, easily resolved behind closed doors. The public rarely saw what happened away from the spotlight. While Bishop Morton devoted himself to his church and congregation, the emotional reality at home was far more complicated. The narrative of strength masked a different story, one marked by silence, unspoken pain, and unacknowledged struggles. This gap between image and truth planted seeds of doubt that would eventually grow. It is often said that appearances can be deceiving, and the Mortons' story is a striking reminder of that. The world watched a powerful couple projected as flawless, but that flawless veneer was fragile. The first cracks, small and almost invisible, hinted at deeper fractures. What lay beneath would soon come to light in ways no one anticipated. The pressure on public figures to maintain a perfect image is immense, especially within faith communities. As a respected spiritual leader, Bishop Morton's reputation felt untouchable. Many believed he was above personal flaws or marital discord. This belief created a protective bubble that kept harsh realities from breaking through for years. Yet, even the strongest images can't hold forever when worn thin by silence and sacrifice. Behind warm smiles and carefully crafted sermons was an uneven landscape where joy and pain coexisted in uneasy tension. The longer the silence lasted, the heavier the burden became, setting the stage for a moment of truth. This story challenges us to look deeper than surface impressions and recognize the complexity of human relationships, especially when shadowed by public expectation. It asks whether the strength we see is real or just carefully maintained illusion. And it hints that the answers will only emerge when hidden voices finally rise. What follows reveals more than personal struggles. It uncovers how faith, love, and power can collide beneath the surface of even the most admired lives. The full truth waits just beyond those first cracks, ready to reshape everything we thought we knew. Transitioning from this hidden turmoil, the next chapter reveals the silent battles Dr. Deborah Morton endured for decades, her personal pain concealed behind unwavering support and quiet endurance. Dr. Deborah Morton's silent struggles. For years, Dr. Deborah Morton lived in the shadow of a marriage that seemed perfect to outsiders, but felt isolating to her. While Bishop Paul Morton's time and heart were poured into the church and its people, she often found herself alone, waiting for the husband she had married. Her emotional needs were unmet, replaced by the demands of a calling that left little room for her voice. She described feeling invisible in her own marriage, a painful admission that revealed the gulf between public perception and private reality. Instead of partnership, she experienced a one-sided relationship where decisions were made without her input. The marriage, she said, was not a union of equals, but rather a dynamic controlled almost entirely by her husband's role as a pastor. This silence was a choice she made long ago. For decades, Dr. Morton endured quietly, prioritizing peace and the church's reputation over her own truth. She accepted the role expected of her, the devoted wife who supports without question and speaks only of strength. Yet inside, she was carrying a storm of loneliness and suppression. The nature of her struggle illustrates a broader issue faced by many spouses of public figures, especially within religious communities. The unspoken rule to stand beside him no matter what leaves little space for vulnerability or complaint. For Dr. Morton, that expectation became a prison, binding her identity to silence and self-sacrifice. Despite the hardship, she did not want to destroy or shame her husband. Her choice to speak out late in life was not an attack, but an act of self-preservation and courage. She finally gave voice to feelings kept hidden for decades, exposing a pain that few had suspected, but many could empathize with. The emotional distance at home often felt louder than the sermons that filled countless Sundays. Moments that should have united them instead highlighted the growing gap. She longed for partnership, but instead found herself waiting for attention that was always directed elsewhere. Her story challenges the notion of what true support means in a marriage, especially when one spouse carries a demanding public role. The silence she chose lifted, allowing truths to emerge that demanded attention, truths that would not only affect their relationship, but also ripple through their community. As Dr. Morton's voice grew louder, the hidden fractures in their marriage became impossible to ignore, setting the stage for revelations that touched on deeper issues of control and trust. Control and trust in crisis. One of the most unsettling aspects Dr. Morton revealed was the lack of partnership in key decisions, especially those involving family finances. She recounted how Bishop Morton once made a major financial choice without consulting her, a breach of trust that risked their family's stability. This was more than a mistake about money. It struck at the core of their relationship's foundation. Trust in any marriage depends on inclusion and respect. Yet Dr. Morton felt excluded from decisions that affected their shared life. She questioned how it was possible to build a future together when one partner held control without dialogue. Her words underline the loneliness of living under such conditions, where autonomy is compromised by silence. This dynamic went beyond finances. It reflected an imbalance of power that shaped how the couple interacted daily. Bishop Morton's role as a leader in the church seemed to bleed into their marriage, creating an environment where his influence became overwhelming. Dr. Morton's contributions and opinions were often sidelined. The financial issue was a critical turning point, a tangible example of problems that had been growing quietly for years. It nearly jeopardized the family's security, a crisis that brought hidden tensions to the surface. For Dr. Morton, it made clear that her silence was no longer sustainable. What makes this particularly difficult is the sacred context in which the Mortons lived. Within religious circles, honesty and unity are prized values, yet the pressure to maintain a flawless image often means personal struggles are kept under wraps. Dr. Morton's experience highlights the cost of that silence. Her decision to speak openly was, therefore, radical. It challenged not only her husband, but also the wider community that had upheld the Mortons as a perfect example. The fallout wasn't just private. It touched on issues of transparency, respect, and the true meaning of partnership. This breach of trust became a catalyst for change, forcing difficult conversations about accountability and shared responsibility. It raised questions about how leadership positions intersect with personal lives, and how boundaries must be respected to preserve both. The next chapter reveals how these revelations echoed far beyond their home, stirring reactions that reflected the community's struggle to reconcile faith with human complexity. Community impact and reactions. The moment Dr. Deborah Morton shared her story publicly, the response was immediate and intense. Social media erupted with shock, disbelief, and a swirl of emotions. Many followers who had admired the Mortons struggled to reconcile the loving image they had held with the painful realities now revealed. This sudden unveiling forced a collective reckoning within the community. Some reacted with heartbreak, unable to accept that a respected spiritual leader could have such personal struggles at home. Others expressed anger, feeling betrayed by the silence and the years of hidden turmoil. A vocal group criticized Dr. Morton for speaking out, accusing her of damaging her husband's reputation and the church's standing. Yet alongside these criticisms came voices of praise, calling her brave and long overdue in speaking her truth. The story quickly transcended the Mortons themselves, becoming a reflector for many silently enduring similar pains. People began sharing their own experiences of struggles concealed behind facades of faith and strength. What had once been dismissed or ignored now demanded attention, shifting the conversation about relationships in spiritual communities. This uproar revealed how difficult it is to confront imperfection, especially when it involves leaders held to lofty standards. The expectation of flawless conduct collided with the raw reality of human vulnerability, causing confusion and deep reflection. The chasm between public image and private experience grew harder to ignore. Within the church, members began to speak up after years of silence. Some admitted they had noticed moments of coldness or tension, but felt powerless or unwilling to question someone so revered. Others confessed to seeing signs they didn't fully understand before, signs they now recognized as cries for help. This acknowledgement marked a turning point in how the congregation viewed the Mortons. The controversy sparked broader debates about leadership, accountability, and the price of maintaining appearances. It raised tough questions. Are spiritual leaders allowed room to struggle? How does a faith community balance grace with truth? These questions challenged many to rethink their assumptions about authority and authenticity. Dr. Morton also revealed that her courage hadn't come overnight. She had sought help privately in the past, but was repeatedly advised to stay silent for the sake of the ministry and to protect her husband's image. This revelation exposed the systemic pressures on women in religious spaces to prioritize reputation over their own well-being. The conversations that followed forced not only the Mortons, but the entire faith community to confront uncomfortable realities about silence, power, and support. The once untouchable image of a perfect couple cracked open, allowing space for dialogue, vulnerability, and perhaps eventual healing. Sometimes breaking silence is the first step toward change, but that step often comes with division, and the Mortons' story was no exception. The complexities of public forgiveness and personal accountability were about to come to the forefront. Breaking silence and seeking change. In the wake of Dr. Morton's revelations, Bishop Paul Morton took a rare and public step. He addressed his congregation directly, standing at the pulpit where he had preached for years, and acknowledged his faults with a broken voice. "I am not a perfect man," he admitted, confessing he had caused the deepest hurt to the woman he loved most. This moment was raw, personal, and unlike any public statement he had made before. His apology stirred mixed feelings. Some were moved, seeing a man willing to admit mistakes and seek forgiveness. Others questioned why such honesty had taken so long, why these words only came after years of silence, and only once the truth was aired publicly. This hesitation to speak sooner added to the skepticism that surrounded his apology. Bishop Morton asked for forgiveness, but many wondered if words alone could heal years of pain. Forgiveness, they felt, required change, visible sustained transformation that demonstrated respect and partnership. For a marriage strained by control and silence, rebuilding trust would demand much more than an apology. The congregation and wider community became divided. Supporters emphasized that pastors are human too, vulnerable and imperfect. They advocated grace and encouragement for Bishop Morton's efforts to grow as a husband and leader. Meanwhile, others stood firmly with Dr. Morton, insisting that silence is not strength and that bearing pain for public image is unacceptable. This tension opened a deeper conversation about what life is truly like behind the scenes in spiritual homes. It challenged the idea that public success equates to personal peace. The Morton's story became a mirror reflecting the struggles many face silently, an urgent call to prioritize transparency and healing over appearances. As the pressure just kept building, Bishop Morton stayed there, not so much retreating, more like remaining present somehow. He kept preaching. He let guest pastors step in and share the pulpit. And then he started attending counseling as well. All of it kind of pointed to this willingness to work on whatever his shortcomings were, even if a lot of community folks were still waiting for something more solid, clear signs that the change would actually last. While that was happening, Dr. Morton's voice gained a different kind of respect too. She was invited to speak straight to the congregation, not only as the bishop's wife, but as a woman who had passed through a hard chapter with grace and courage. Her words landed in a quiet church. No big drama, no shock exactly, more like a deep respect in the room, and you could tell people were starting to see her in a new way. Still though, healing turned out to be complicated. Not everybody was prepared to forgive or to move past things, and a few people ended up walking away, disappointed. The whole story didn't end with a clean, perfect resolution. Instead, it felt more like an actual beginning, one that held pain and accountability together, with that uncertain road toward restoration stretching out in front of them. Nothing about this healing was easy or tidy, but it was real. And that kind of reality offered a fresh sort of hope for the Mortons, for their community, and for anyone watching from the outside. The struggle to turn truth into healing can be painful, but it can also open doors that silence keeps locked tight. What followed next would reveal how the Mortons attempted to rebuild not just their marriage, but their faith and public witness. The road to healing and new beginnings. Despite the rupture of long-held silence, the Mortons made a remarkable choice. They stayed together. Instead of retreating from the public eye or ending their marriage, they faced the painful work of rebuilding in full view. This decision to remain united challenged the expectation that exposure of private struggles inevitably leads to separation or disgrace. Bishop Morton's approach shifted noticeably. Gone was the image of the flawless leader. In its place emerged a man willing to show vulnerability and admit imperfection. He softened his tone and leadership style, opening space for greater transparency both at home and in the church. This change, surprisingly, drew more people in, demonstrating the power of authenticity over perfection. Counseling became a cornerstone of their healing journey. Bishop Morton sought outside help and brought in guest pastors to share the pulpit, moves that once would have seemed unlikely. Dr. Morton was no longer just the bishop's wife, but a respected voice in her own right, invited to speak to the congregation about her experiences and the lessons learned from pain and endurance. This new chapter was not about erasing past mistakes, but acknowledging them honestly and building from there. The Mortons' story inspired conversations beyond their church walls, in living rooms, prayer groups, and online forums where others wrestled with their own silenced struggles. It showed that admitting brokenness can spark wider healing, not just personal recovery. Still, not everyone really took to all these changes. Some church folks went away, a bit disappointed, or unwilling to walk that more vulnerable road, you know. Others stayed put, and they seemed genuinely moved by the sheer courage they saw, and quietly hopeful that something like real transformation could happen. Those mixed reactions kinda said it plainly. How hard it can be to juggle forgiveness with accountability, grace alongside truth, without it turning into either one thing or the other. At the core of all of it was Dr. Morton's message, and it landed hard. She loved her husband, sure, but she wanted peace, not pretense. Her willingness to speak up, not to fuel revenge but to find release, sort of shifted the whole conversation. Instead of scandal, it became something closer to renewal. A lot of people took from that telling the truth is a kind of step toward freedom, even when it shows up late or later than you'd like. Now, their journey is still far from complete. Yet, the Mortons have shown that healing can be slow, public, and honestly painful. And also, that it can bring you to something deeply meaningful, like in spite of everything. Their story also points to a basic idea: love and respect need to share the same room if a marriage is going to last, and silence, well, it only keeps wounds out of sight until they can't be hidden anymore. What the Mortons ran into is a lesson for everyone, no matter where someone sits or what calling they think they have. Vulnerability is strength, and truth spoken bravely can change lives. Their road ahead is basically a quiet proof of resilience, forgiveness, and the ongoing grind of being real in a world that usually demands perfection, like it's the only option. Morton's story shows us that even shattered images can lead to real healing when truth and love are embraced. It reminds us that silence isn't strength, and that honesty is the first step to freedom. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe for more deep dives into untold truths and inspiring journeys. Your voice matters. Let's keep the conversation going.